The New Orleans Pelicans are planning to have a pre-draft workout with Zach Edey, but I'm going to tell you why that might not mean much in terms of their pre-draft plans. It's the Friday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Friday, final show of the week. We got a lot to cover in this one. The Pelicans working out Zach Edey, center out of Purdue, but it might not mean what you think. Then I want to get into looking at the 17th pick, the Lakers pick that the Pelicans could have. And I'm going to tell you why they should not exercise that option and they should leave it for another year. And then let's look at maybe the timing of a Brandon Ingram trade and how this weaker draft could impact that. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this team. So please subscribe, join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube. And if you're an everydayer, which means you listen Monday through Friday, and thank you, comment down below and let me know. So let's get into it with Zach Edey, center out of Purdue. This is one of the more, I do think, intriguing prospects in this draft. He's huge. You saw him take Purdue to the championship game this year. He is 7.5 feet. 7'5" with a almost 7'11" wingspan. That is insane. This is a dude that just blocks shots left and right. The Pelicans have a big need at center. They don't have a starting one. They don't even really have a backup one right now, other than Larry Nance Jr., but I think they want to try and improve all of that. Edey is definitely a guy that is a big body down low that was just a productive college player. Last year, over 25 points per game, 12 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks, and he shot 62% from the field. He also did pretty well at the free throw line, getting there over 11 times per game and shooting above 70%, 71.1. It's just a big body, y'all, and he is a shot blocker. If you need some rim protection, it doesn't get much better than a big dude like this. And one of the things that I think stood out with Zach Edey in the combine was that his agility was good. Is he the fastest? No. But does he have a pretty good lateral side-to-side movement? Yeah, there's more athleticism there than you realize. And even in the three-point shooting drills, he did pretty well knocking down threes, showing maybe somehow there is some three-point shooting talent there. All of that said, I think he projects to be more of a backup center than a starting center. Doesn't mean you couldn't start him, doesn't mean he wouldn't be productive, but I think particularly when you look at this Pelicans team, he's not going to be a court spacer anytime soon at all. Can you pair him with Zion? Now, Zion has done well with lumbering big men like Jonas Valanciunas, like Steven Adams, and before that, I'm completely blanking on the center they did get from the Utah Jazz. So when you look at that, Zion can still be productive, but if you're ever going to try to do something a little bit different or go and get the guy you need, this would be the year to do it. And so I just don't know if Edey is the best fit here in New Orleans. That said, if he's there available at 21, there's probably just so much talent that you have to really consider drafting him and bringing him in. Derek Favors was the other center, is who I was thinking of. But I don't think bringing him in for a workout truly means that they're planning on drafting him. One of the things to keep an eye on, I like that they're bringing him for a workout. That's important, right? Rim protection is something they definitely want to try and get, and I think could revolutionize the defense, make it better while still leaning in offensively a little bit more. During this pre-draft process, you're going to see a ton of names come into the Pelicans, a ton come in for workouts. The pre-draft process and the way it works for a lot of these teams is gathering data. Just data on players. Not necessarily guys you're thinking about drafting, but guys maybe you sign in free agency in future years. Guys that you maybe want to trade for later down the line. They're going to bring in a variety of names. So trying to kind of read the tea leaves of look at all these people they're bringing in. Look at who they're not bringing in. I don't think that really says too much. I think it's more they're doing their due diligence as all of these teams should. And as we start to get to kind of pre-draft workout season here, you're going to see a lot of names that either get you excited or don't get you excited, and that's okay. But Zach Edey is an intriguing name, right? You know, there's a lot of interesting big men at that 21st overall pick. We're only going to focus on the 21st overall picks. We'll talk about 17th coming up next because the deadline for them to make a decision on that Lakers pick is tomorrow. Saturday, the 1st. You know, there's Kelly Ware there. There is Deron Holmes, who we just talked about. There's Missy there as well. There's a lot of guys that are very intriguing. Edey, I think, could be one of the better, okay, he's ready to play and he will contribute right away. More of a back-to-the-basket big man. He's not exactly a lob threat, even though he's super, super tall. I don't even need to jump. You can just throw it up to him and he just sticks his arms up and he puts it down. And look at the work he did against UConn, back-to-back national championship team UConn in that title game where he went out and had a heck of a game, right? Like he did everything he could, 37 points. He was 15 of 25 in that title game where there wasn't a ton of other talent around him, or at least on the same level as him with Purdue. So to see kind of the run that he had in that tournament and winning those games, including a 40-point game, right, against Tennessee, that's pretty impressive. And that makes you think that maybe you should take a flyer on him. I think there's better fits. I think there's guys you maybe really want to go and try and get that are better long-term for all of that. But I do think that the talent is there that, like, if some of the other guys aren't, like, maybe this is the type of player that you need to try and go and get. And that's something maybe you just want to do. Let me know what you think. If Edey is available, say all the big men are available at 21. Here's a question I'll pose to you. If all the big men are available at 21, Edey, Ware, Missy, Holmes, I'm probably forgetting one or two there as well, Filipowski, who I'm kind of like souring on a little bit. If all of them are there, do you rank them? Is Edey your number one? Is like that who you want to see them take? Or is the lack of three-point shooting, is the lack of spacing? And he does not provide that, and he won't provide that. Does that concern you? Or you just want a dude who can play? I do think it's a little bit weird to potentially draft what I view as a backup center before you have a starting center. But also maybe that's something that you can dress in another way as well. So that I think is going to be an interesting decision. But right now, don't make too much into like names that the Pelicans are bringing in for pre-draft workouts, because they're going to bring in a whole lot of names, which is a good thing. Gather that data, make you a better front office going forward too. So coming up next, what do you do about the 17th overall pick in this draft? You could probably maybe get Edey there, though I'll tell you why I don't think so a little bit later. Do you want to take that pick, draft two guys in this, or do you not? Let's break it down, because the Pelicans have a decision to make, and I'm going to tell you why they should not for one main reason. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members, and it's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You pick more or less on two or more players' stats, and then you watch the winnings roll in. So March is over, but the biggest moments in basketball are still going on with basketball's postseason. And now you can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Basketball, hockey, baseball entries on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. So you can get quick withdrawals. There's easy gameplay, an enormous selection of players and stat types, and that's what makes PrizePicks the #1 fantasy sports app. So if you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $1,000 with just a few taps. So download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's up to $100 in a first-time deposit match when you use promo code LOCKEDONNBA after you download the PrizePick app. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen, go check out Locked On Saints. Ross Jackson breaking down everything you want to know about the black and gold. Derek Carr looking good in OTAs. Will that continue? What's the new offense going to look like under Kubiak? He's covering it all, so make sure you know what's going on with the Saints over at the Locked On Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we just talked Zach Edey. We're talking a little bit of draft here. And I do think for a down year in this draft, there's some good enough players, incomplete if anything, but good enough players in this range. It kind of sucks to be picking in like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think. But I think after that, it kind of normalizes a little bit better and there's value to be had there. So do the Pelicans really need 2 picks, though, in that area? They do not. They do not. And this is going to tie into what we're going to talk about in the next segment, too, where I don't think a Brandon Ingram trade is necessarily going to happen on draft night now. And talking to people around the league and kind of looking at this draft, I think sheds some light on that. So you could have the 17th pick. This was part of the Anthony Davis trade. The Pelicans have the option for it this year or next year. They can defer it, give the Lakers the 17th overall pick, or defer it for another year. The Lakers lost in the first round. They have LeBron James. They have Anthony Davis. They're likely going to be better next season, I think. They're going to have a new head coach, and coaching definitely was holding them back at times, I think, even if Darvin Ham wasn't really like the full-on scapegoat. They were 47-35, 2 games worse than the Pelicans in terms of record here, overall record. They could be better than that, right? They could be better than that. They were the 8th seed. They had to go through the play-in tournament. They could be 6. In theory, this pick could be worse next year. 17th pick now, 22nd, 23rd, 24th pick in next year's draft. Here's the thing, though. Next year's draft is considered better top to bottom than this one. It's a pretty well-regarded draft if you talk to draft experts and people who cover this for a living. So next year's 21st overall pick, might be the equivalent of the 15th pick in this draft because the talent level in this one overall is lower. So you've got to look at it like that. Yes, you might actually get a worse pick, but you probably are going to get a better caliber player. That's something, and I should have said this, by the way, in the first segment here, and I meant to do it, and I completely forgot. Brandon Robinson, Scoop B, is the one who reported that Edey was working out for the Pelicans in the pre-draft workout. So back to the point about the Lakers pick, getting a better player is what you want to do. The other thing that I think is worth considering with this, and that's not even getting to the main point of why you should not do this and you should kick this pick till next year, is Willie Green's not going to play 2 rookies, right? Like, we know this. Willie Green is not going to play 2 rookies. There's no point in drafting someone 17 and 21 because you're not going to play both of them. So it's going to hurt you this season. And given that this is a weaker draft than next year, how much, with the 17th pick, the 21st pick, we hope they turn into something, but I'd say the odds of that are a little bit lower than what we would like. So are they even going to help you in the future? That's a big question mark too, that player that you would draft. So don't use 2 first-round picks. The other thing is, I don't think that you can trade up in this draft with the 17th and 21st and get like 14, something like that. And I don't think that's good value anyway because you want to use these picks in a bigger trade, maybe involving Brandon Ingram or to get another starting center. And that leads to kind of the main point with this. Future picks are always worth more unless it's like a top 2 pick than the current year. I joke about this, and this is something that if you're a longtime listener, I've said a lot. there's a lot of value placed on future first round picks, right? Like that is the currency in the NBA for getting deals done. They're always worth more when it's not a player. The second it's a player, that value of that isn't equivalent. The player is not the equivalent value of the pick, if that makes sense, right? You know, if you think about the NFL, right? Each draft pick kind of has a point value to it. It's that Jerry Jones, the draft chart with the Cowboys, right? So that's how you can kind of figure out deals and things like that. And I know it's shifted over the years. The second a player's say pick 10 is worth 1,000 points. The second you draft a player, it's not like that player is worth 1,000 points, right? It is going to be less than that because some teams won't like that player. That wasn't someone they had on their draft board because this is all kind of subjective and very individual to the team and the franchise. So drafting someone and then trying to include them in a Brandon Ingram trade doesn't necessarily help you if that team doesn't like that player. But including a future first round pick in there, the unknown of that, which kind of creates a little bit of a nebulous value there and probably thus increases it up, that's something that intrigues teams more. And I think that's what's important to look at with this. So if you want to include that Lakers pick in a trade, it's far more valuable as whatever it's going to be next year and whatever player that's going to be than the 17th pick in this draft or with the player that you've already taken. Asset management is a way to look at it, right? That's one thing that I think is a big part of this. But if you draft someone and then you want to move them later and that team doesn't like that player, that value is dropped. You've got to try and maximize the value of this to get the best return, and that's how you build a good team. That's what a lot of small markets need to do is kind of look for those like little edges that they can take advantage of. You know, that future first round pick could be anything. It could be a lottery pick. Maybe LeBron gets hurt, Anthony Davis gets hurt. They hire JJ Redick, that doesn't work out, and it's a bit of a disaster. That pick could be more valuable. It's a better draft. There might be a player they're already looking at, and these guys are scouting those players already for next year that you like even more, so you can go and get that guy. You can use that in a future trade because that's easier to trade than players who have salaries attached to it too, right? That matters into this. So that pick is definitely going to be worth more in the future. And if a Brandon Ingram trade isn't done on draft night, you don't want to be stuck with a player. You'd rather have that kind of unknown possibility. It could be anything. It could even be a boat, right? Like that's the joke here, but it's true. So you definitely want to kick this pick a year. We'll see what the Pelicans end up doing. Maybe there's someone they like. Maybe they're already working on a deal for Brandon Ingram and they know they need to include this pick involved with it. I'm not entirely sure yet. We'll see. But my guess would be they don't exercise this option and that on Monday when we give an update on this, it's going to be the Lakers have the 17th pick, the Pelicans have the 21st, and that's the way it's going to look at. And we're not going to be looking at 2 first-round picks in a weaker draft. And then I think you'll see this pick moved eventually. And it buys you more time to do that. Because here's the thing. Will a Brandon Ingram deal get done on draft night? And I'm leaning a little bit towards no, and that has to do with the weaker draft and some of the things we just talked about here. Let's break that down coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team, looking at the draft, looking at workouts, keeping you up to date on everything going on with this Pelicans team. So please subscribe and join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Tell a friend about the show, right? You're going to get a lot of draft coverage here. You're not going to get anywhere else. We're here Monday through Friday as well. So always here for you. Now for your second listen, you watching Fox Sports, ESPN? Are you just listening to things that aren't talking about what you want to hear? Do you have to turn down the volume with yelling, shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all the yelling. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So one of the things I get asked about a lot is like, when is a Brandon Ingram trade going to get done? And I think the logical next kind of date for this would be right around the draft, day before, day of, whatever it might be. Teams tend to work better when there is a deadline and they got to do something, right? We saw that even with the Zion draft year. They also had the 4th pick in that draft, and they traded that for the 8th and 17th, which turned into Jackson Hayes and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. But that deal wasn't done until like the day before the draft, day of the draft, I forget which, but basically when you had a deadline to kind of do something. That trade was also partially a deal to dump Solomon Hill's real bad contract as well. So, because we don't need to relitigate that deal. So, yeah, I think it's a natural, logical thing that a deal would get done for Brandon Ingram around the draft. But given that it's a weaker draft, if you're including the 21st overall pick in that and there's no player that team likes, I think it hurts you. And that maybe means you can't get a deal done. And I look at things like the Donovan Mitchell trade. That got done later. And I think that is, we were talking about this in yesterday's show. I do think that kind of maybe gives you the blueprint here. You're going to spend a lot of the summer kind of negotiating. It's going to get into free agency where maybe you see if you can sign Brandon Ingram for cheaper. But if he isn't going to do that, then you're absolutely going to look to trade him. With Donovan Mitchell, if it's just, hey, I didn't want to be in Utah anymore, this isn't going to happen, I'm not going to sign an extension, all of those things, then you look to try and move him so that you can make sure you're making the most of your assets. And essentially, at that point in time, he had a couple of years left on his deal. So that was good. So they had a lot of leverage there, but they knew he wasn't going to stay long-term. So they pivoted. Pelicans are dealing with a little bit less leverage here, but Donovan Mitchell was traded on September 3rd, right? Free agency is going to start on July 1, July 3rd, whatever the date is. When you look at it like that, that's when a lot of things could get done, but I think it then gives the Pelicans a little bit more insight onto what they're going to be able to do. I don't think they're dead set on moving Brandon Ingram. I think they will certainly look to here, but I don't think if you can get him for the right deal that they would absolutely want to part ways. And I think they'd like to see if you just put in a different starting center, how would that change things? If you put Trey Murphy in starting for Herb Jones, how would that change things? If you bring CJ McCollum, and we did this show, off the bench, how would that change things? There's other things you can do before you go these drastic steps of trying to trade beyond. Now, I think there's players they would happily trade him for, DeJounte Murray being one of them, maybe Trey Young. If you get Donovan Mitchell and knew he would sign an extension, that's a real great thing. But if you can't, see if you can sign Brandon Ingram for a cheaper extension. You still have him for one more year. And then if it's like, no, that's not going to happen, we're going nowhere in negotiations, that's when you just kind of open it back up and then make a deal and move him. So I don't necessarily think that it's going to get done on draft night. Now, if there was a player there that another team coveted, you could definitely get a deal done a little bit easier, but that isn't the case, right? Given it's a weaker draft, I think that makes it a little bit tougher to do a Brandon Ingram trade. If you're trying to trade him for Trey Young, and it's Brandon Ingram and the 21st overall pick for Trey Young, let's say, and all of a sudden the Pelicans are on the clock at 21, they're calling Atlanta, being like, you want to do this? There's no player Atlanta likes. They're not going to just take a dude. They might be like, no, we're going to wait here. If there was a player they coveted that they really wanted right there, then yeah, maybe they jump on that a little bit more. That's easier to do in a draft that's loaded with talent versus this kind of weaker draft that's a little bit thinner with some of those guys that you think could immediately contribute right away. That's why that Lakers pick is maybe the one that you would include in a deal like that. That could be anything, right? You could even flip it in the future. Just buys you more time with that. So I think that's part of why this draft could complicate the timing a little bit on a Brandon Ingram trade. And I think everyone's still kind of feeling out the trade market right now. That's why you're not really seeing anything get done. Donovan Mitchell's likely maybe going to get moved. Others are too, and nothing's happening right now. One, because the finals are going to get going on. We still have the Western Conference Finals in a game tonight. But there's also, I'm recording this on Thursday. So the draft is going to be the first kind of time when he would get moved. But I don't know if it's going to happen then. And if it doesn't, don't panic. If you're one of the people that's get Brandon Ingram off the team, don't panic if it's not done yet. There's still plenty of time to get a deal done. And a lot of these things, because the Pelicans want to get the right return, are complicated, take some time with negotiations. So you could see this drag out into like the latter part of the summer as we get closer to training camp, right? Training camp is going to start right around October 1. Donovan Mitchell was traded less than a month before that. Kind of tells you a lot right there about how some of these deals get done. And I think looking at the Donovan Mitchell timing is kind of appropriate for when it comes to Brandon Ingram and what the timing of a trade might look like. Are you going to be worried, though, if they don't trade him on draft night? Are you thinking they're going to bring him back? Do you think they'll sign him to a max extension? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. I appreciate y'all so much for listening, watching this week. More to come with the draft, maybe a couple draft experts on next week's show as well. I'm looking forward to that. So I appreciate y'all taking the time to listen to the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget the first ever National Sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, also available on the Amazon Free Fire TV and the Free Fire TV channels app, Locked On Sports Today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I'll see y'all back on Monday.